Kubernetes, as we all know, has become the backbone of cloud native computing. But the real story isn't just about technology, it's about the people, the culture, and the community that keeps it alive. Today, I'm joined by two familiar faces in this space: Kat Cosgrove, Kubernetes release team subproject lead and head of developer advocacy at Minimus, and Billy Thompson, senior global DevOps and platform engineering office of the CTO at Akamai. Together, we will dive into the state of cloud computing, the evolution of open source, and what it really takes to sustain such a massive community. And of course, we'll talk about AI as well. Kat, Billy, it's great to have you both on the show.
Happy to be here.
As always, thank you.
First of all, it's my pleasure. Honestly, I wonder who in this space doesn't already know you both. But for those who may be new to the ecosystem, I would love to hear from you. What role do you each play in this community? Just talk a little bit about yourself. Kat, I'll start with you.
My job is to herd cats 3 times a year. So I make sure that Kubernetes gets out the door successfully and safely. It involves managing a relatively large team made up of 4 sub-teams that make sure that everybody follows the rules, that changes with user-facing endpoints have documentation, that we have production readiness review for all enhancements, and most importantly, that the release actually happens on time in spite of any hurdles like, I don't know, an upstream Go security issue or something. So that's it. 3 times a year. Takes 14 weeks each time. It's a little bit messy, but somebody does have to do that job.
So on paper, my role is that I'm the DevOps and platform engineering specialist for the cloud CTO team, which just means that any sort of customer or potential customer engagement that team touches, that if they're doing stuff with anything related to DevOps and platform engineering and need to succeed on that, then I'm the resource to get brought in. But in addition to that, the part of it that's not on paper is that I travel to a lot of conferences. I do a lot of informal dev advocate work, usually targeting the higher level 300, level 400 type stuff, as well as I work with our partner teams and biz dev teams and cross-connect with different companies and open source projects that our company can be looking to support and sponsor and work with in some way, because we are not trying to boil the ocean with a bunch of managed services. We want to support the ecosystem that's out there and build things together.
Thank you for those introductions. Let's step back and talk about the whole cloud computing ecosystem. Kubernetes was the anchor project for CNCO, but over the years, both the technology and the culture have evolved. Kat, more broadly, how do you see this community? How do you see its maturity, its challenges, and its opportunities?
I would certainly say that it is mature at this point. There's a lot of jokes made about like Kubernetes is going to be 1.x forever, and you can make some probably incorrect assumptions about the maturity of Kubernetes based on the fact that it's still just 1.x. But the ecosystem in general is mature. Kubernetes is the second largest open source project in the world behind Linux. So we're definitely not small. We're not little anymore, and we're underpinning a fairly significant amount of the world's digital infrastructure. So certainly Kubernetes is at a point where I would call it mature, and the ecosystem in general, I would also say is getting pretty close to mature if it's not already there. There's still a lot of change to do. We have a lot of sprawl, like Atlanta as a city, the center of it is not that big, but it stretches like for seemingly eternity throughout a significant portion of the state of Georgia. Atlanta is where the next KubeCon is. And the cloud native ecosystem is kind of like that too. It's kind of like swallowing up other parts of, just digital technology. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It certainly introduces some challenges with respect to like deciding what your stack is going to look like when you're building an application, because there are just simply so many choices. If you look at an image of the CNCF landscape, it is ridiculous. It's overwhelming. It's massive. There's like a dozen tools in any given category, and it can be really difficult to know where to start. So I would say that that is our biggest challenge. It's just kind of, it can be unapproachable if you're not already entrenched in it.
Yes, that's true. Kubernetes has really become one of the biggest open source projects after the Linux kernel. The growth and adoption are clear. But even with that momentum, there are still some pain points. And these pain points are the one that most people don't even see. They are not aware of these. Kat, what are some of those challenges you think the community still needs to work through?
As a Kubernetes maintainer, yes, there are some. Kubernetes is 11 years old now, and a lot of the original maintainers, the original committers, are still around. And I myself have been around for a while too, right? It's been 6 years, 5 years. And there's definitely a cultural problem where we forget that we're not a small project anymore. So we can't just like do cowboy stuff all the time. We can't do whatever we want anymore. And we forget that other people's perception of the project is different because we're all friends. We all know each other and have known each other and worked together and hung out together for a long time. So it's easy for us to forget that newcomers don't have more than a decade of like social context into how this project works. So we're experiencing some growing pains now where we're realizing we have to document a lot of things and processes that we never felt we had to anymore. The release team is made up mostly of people who are new to Kubernetes, and many of them are new to open source in general, period. So we've been making a lot of assumptions about what people know that turned out to be incorrect. And we are fixing that now. But I think any open source project starts to experience that at a certain point of growth. It gets to a certain size, gets to a certain degree of being relied upon by other companies where you go, wait, hold on, this is not just like me and 15 of my best friends anymore. This is me and 15 of my best friends and 300 strangers. And you have to change the way you work a little bit.
Now, Billy, it's your turn. I would love to hear your thoughts on this from your side at Akamai.
Yeah, well, it's interesting hearing Kat's latter perspective on that of, the growing pains and stuff like that, because for one, that's just a good problem to have. But the other part is that from my perspective, the Kubernetes project has been a marvel of maturity for a very long time. It exemplifies the whole concept of open source, and in particular, the community aspect of it, that the project always did very, very well at that. Comparatively, there may be Kat and others that have different opinions at different points in time. But when you look at, for example, there's a lot of companies that want to say, hey, we love open source, we support open source. There's influencers, podcasters, whatever. But when you look at their actual behavior in the ecosystem, it's not led by community. It's transactional. It's missing the point. So Kubernetes being something with this really good governance model and the way it's opened up to contributors, it set the standard, if you will, for standardization in a way to make it extensible for all these other companies to just plug into it. And then in addition to these conferences that have just been enormous for years, that literally bring in everyone from hobbyist developers on more of like an activist mission to be completely vendor neutral and open source and supporting in that way, all the way up to large enterprises. And we're all coming together at a connecting point, and we're talking about and excited about open source and the real actual community aspect of it. And then you look at just how enormous the project is, how many committers there is to it, and it's just going and going and going and going. This has set the example. in addition to the concept of that ecosystem, the foundation to support it and keep that thriving, and the different sponsorship models, it's incredibly mature and has been for a very long time in my perspective, and is one of the better things we have going for us in that regard.
When I look at Kubernetes, it's pretty unique. Not only it is one of the most successful open source projects after the Linux kernel, it is also running in production almost everywhere, just like the Linux kernel. Kat, from your perspective, what really made Kubernetes so successful? Was it the fact that it came out of Google, where it was already being used in production? Is it because of the support that Linux Foundation provided through CNCF? Was it the early users? Is it the vendor ecosystem? Or is it the passionate community like you folks? Or maybe it's a mix of all of that?
So the CNCF exists because of Kubernetes, and it was founded, I think, like, I don't know, 3 or 6 months. We can fact check me about that later online. A few months after the Kubernetes project was made open source, was dumped on GitHub. So the CNCF exists because of it. The like vendor buy-in, like the cloud providers, those services didn't exist at first. The longest lived and first cloud provider for Kubernetes is GCP. So yeah, I think having like nearly right out the gate the resources of the Linux Foundation via the CNCF, and also nearly right out the gate having the resources of GCP being like the only game in town certainly helped. But I think the bigger thing was that it was at the right time. This was only a couple short years after Docker's popularity skyrocketed. Docker was released a little bit after EC2 was, and then it like did a hockey stick. If you look at the Google search trends for Docker, we had containers before that, but Docker made them easy to share. And that caused an explosion in people developing containerized applications, but we didn't have a way to manage them very well, and Kubernetes just landed at the right time. Of course, there was also Docker Swarm and a couple of other things, but Kubernetes did have the backing of Google engineers, even though, you know, donating to a foundation means that the donating company no longer has control, and that's not like there's no take backsies. Google could never take it back, but it was a confluence of things all going right at the same time. I think if it had been released a year earlier or a year later, it probably would not have landed quite so well. And it wasn't immediately outrageously popular, but it was pretty quick. It was also at a time when people were kind of starting to accept that open source was profitable. Before the Red Hat sale, at least. People like my dad, who is a software engineer and he's like 70, believed that open source was not something you could make money on. It was a waste of money. It was not profitable. It was not safe. It was not secure. There was no reason to use it. It was just for like internet hippies, basically. But the expensive Red Hat sale kind of started convincing people otherwise. So there was also just the immediate business interest, and this is potentially a hot thing I can jump onto and make money off of.
You touched on something really important. We need to talk about that. The way contributions have changed in this ecosystem. In the early days, a lot of people were hacking on open source at night in their free time outside of their day job. Developers didn't even feel responsible for supporting users because the fact was that they were all volunteers doing that in their free time. But now many people are paid to contribute during their workday, and that has shifted the culture. There is more accountability, there is more responsibility towards the community. Kat, how have you seen that change play out with Kubernetes and CNCF?
So most of us actually are still doing it in our free time. It's a relatively small percentage of Kubernetes maintainers are being paid by their employers full time to work on Kubernetes. Even like people that are on the steering committee or the technical oversight committee are not necessarily being paid by their employers to do it. I'm very lucky in that Minimus does pay me to do this. This is part of my job. but it's easy for me to justify that because I'm a developer advocate. So that's true for everywhere I've worked with a developer advocacy title, that being active and entrenched in developer communities by actually contributing myself is part of the job. But that's not true for most people. If they're doing it, it's often brief, and it is a thing that is going in like a promo packet because they're working on a feature that their employer benefits from getting into Kubernetes. But most of them, no, are in fact still just doing it because they can, doing it because they want to. And open source is still open source. Even if my employer is paying me to do this, I still don't have an obligation to merge a certain PR or review a PR within a certain time frame or respond to an issue in a certain amount of time beyond the social expectations of the project itself. Nobody's like forcing me to do it. We're still working for free, because other people are making money off of the work we're doing, and I'm, one of the few that are actually being paid as a maintainer.
Yes, some of us are lucky to have open source as part of our day job, which also make us feel that we are never working because we are always having fun. But before I pivot to contribution, which is an important aspect of open source, I want to hear from you, Billy. At Akamai, you play a big role and you also go to a lot of events. How have you seen the community evolve over time?
So, all right. So if I think about back when I was in college, a lot of the developers around, these are people that just write code from 9 to 5, and then they go home and just don't even want to think anything about it at all. And that would be the result of that much more proprietary, closed source type of software developer culture that was there at the time. And the communities were more just around specific programming languages, some being better than others. Like you could go to the Python meetups and usually get greeted by people that are very friendly, that are going the extra mile for diversity and inclusion. And then you go to a Java meetup and everyone's kind of more expecting you to know your stuff and less helpful. And it's very different. So Kubernetes, where it sits, and this also connects with one of Kat's previous answers about the timing of everything, because when you look at the evolution of cloud native, right, and what went into making that paradigm, there's two parts to that. There's the technical side of it and the design side of it that runs from DevOps being, hey, this is a problem I think we can solve that'll make this easier, and then on to the 12-factor app principles for decoupling from the infrastructure, and then Docker, as Kat mentioned, and then Kubernetes comes in right at the best moment to be the connecting tissue for all of it. And now we have this whole paradigm of cloud native. But in addition to that, if you look from where things were when I was in college to where they are now, it's the DevOps movement was really one of the communities that was growing across the different languages and bringing in these different principles and really, really still holding true to that to this day, such as the DevOps Days conferences as one example, and things like All Things Open, things that are really, really, really meaningful to that developer culture, that all of this has sort of just progressed into this giant collaboration story that we now call Kubernetes or cloud native, or for that matter, you could even look at the whole CNCF as a whole. And so that difference now, where before coding is just this 9 to 5 kind of whatever job for so many people, versus now the problem is never finding good developers. Like, we are everywhere. We grow on trees at this point, and everyone loves it. It's passion. When you go to any of these smaller conferences or even KubeCon, but you get into the right discussions with the junior developers and so on, and you're asking, okay, what sets you out from the rest? How are you trying to get started? And where one of the first responses is always, I'm passionate about this. I love this. I feel at home with this community. So that's just to sort of, put a scope and a frame around the actual culture shift that the paradigm has helped to grow and pour water on and nurture, along with the whole technical aspect of it.
I remember in past, a lot of tech events were not that diverse. They often had monoculture. Still, there are a lot of events that have such culture, but Linux Foundation has done a great job at making its events more welcoming and inclusive. What role do you think organizations like the Linux Foundation, CNCF, or companies like Minimus or Akamai play in creating that kind of a space where everyone feels respected, they feel welcome, and they feel comfortable to just walk up to you or Billy and start a conversation?
I think that the first thing anybody ever needs, any community, whether it's an event or a language or a tool, is you absolutely 1000% have to have a code of conduct with teeth. You can't have a code of conduct that just says like, "Hey, be chill," to be treat other people with respect, be nice. You can't have that. You have to have an actionable list of acceptable behaviors and unacceptable behaviors, and a way to report that anonymously to a committee, and an alternate reporting option in case you have to file a complaint against somebody on the committee. And the fact that the CNCF and Kubernetes both have those, and we enforce them aggressively, uh, makes us more welcoming. Like, you can be pretty confident that if you have a problem with somebody in the Kubernetes community, and you probably won't, but if you do, we'll jump down their throats about it. They'll get thrown out of the community. I've had somebody banned from Linux Foundation events before because of the way they interacted with me. Like, it's we don't screw around with it. So once you have a reputation for being safe, it's easier for people who typically feel more marginalized to come join your community too. For stuff like KubeCon, I've been on the program committee about 1,000,001 times, and we have requirements about what our speakers have to be like. We don't allow manels. So if you are having a panel, you have to have at least one person who does not identify as a man on the panel, or it's automatically rejected. There's no negotiating it. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't care if it's the CEOs of all of the cloud vendors on one panel. It's not going to happen because it's a panel full of dudes. We're not doing that. We also require that a certain percent of selected speakers never have spoken at KubeCon before, so they're all new, that kind of thing. And it does make it easier to fit in that way, like find a place to fit. If you make sure that the whole community is diverse, everybody can find like a little pocket where they fit in, a clique, a group of people, and it feels safer. It's nicer. We get more done faster that way too. DevOps days conferences are like that too. I'm also at conferences nearly constantly. I'm flying to one tomorrow and another one in 2 weeks, but I don't even bother like putting a call out to see who's going to be at a DevOps days. I just show up, and I know that I'm going to run into a dozen people that I am friends with, and not just like work friends, not colleagues, people I go to the bar with or get dinner with. And it's, that's a nice thing to have. And that's what makes it a community and not just a business. That's what makes us want to do this outside of our 9 to 5s, because we're hanging out with our friends at the same time.
And you are right. Sometimes you can't even make it to your own booth because you're stopped every 5 minutes by friends along the way. Now, Billy, I would like to hear your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, I would also want to include the way that as this community builds, the channels that it opens up for the flip side of this, the ability for companies and individuals to lend more support to open source projects where they can. And even today, I still think that gets overlooked more than it should, but it would certainly be a lot worse, I believe, if it weren't for all the wonderful things that the Kubernetes project has done, the people involved, being very, very inclusive, which being very welcoming, which has helped to grow and help sustain it. But when you think about it, what is open source here? And what does it mean to be community? What that means is you're giving, you're hanging out. You solved the problem for yourself and you wanted to just give it away and donate your time to help solve that for other people. And then meanwhile, you have billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees who are able to send their kids to college or buy houses and cars and all this stuff because of software that somebody wrote and just gave it away for free. Thankless hours spent into this and thankless years of their life, and getting a little bit of help here and there and getting a good thank you, and then being encouraged, other people seeing that and being encouraged to do the same thing. And then to the extent of companies coming around to open source program offices and sponsoring certain projects and wanting to make sure that they sustain there, all of this has been cracked wide open further and further and further because of the community aspect of it.
Yes, it is a very enjoyable experience. It's just like volunteering at your school or the local community to do things. Yes, you give your time, but you also enjoy the process. So I'm kind of curious, Kat, if you can talk about what was your driver, what got you personally involved with open source? What was the fun aspect there?
um, I don't like it when I see something broken that I know how to fix that nobody else is fixing. So it was sort of an accident in my case, actually. I was still a software engineer at the time. I was using Kubernetes, but I wasn't contributing to it. To be more specific, I was using K3s. But many people listening will remember this drama because it was far-reaching, and we didn't handle it as well as we could have initially. But a long, long time ago, a few years ago, the Kubernetes project decided to deprecate the Docker shim. This was a tiny little software shim that allowed you to continue using the entire Docker tech stack as your container runtime. All that shim was doing was allowing access to the instance of containerd that runs inside of Docker Engine, and we deprecated that. We deprecated it because it was a maintenance nightmare. It was an extra thing that we had to take care of, and it wasn't really in line with the ideals of the project, which was we wanted to standardize an interface for container runtimes, and we were allowing you to still use Docker Engine because it was the original container runtime. But it was time to change, so we deprecated it. And we well, I say we, I was not involved in the deprecation. It was before my time, but the Kubernetes project drastically overestimated what the average person understood about the relationship between Kubernetes and Docker, and the difference between Docker and just a container image. So people freaked out like immediately everywhere. Cluster admins freaked out. Regular software developers who don't actually touch Kubernetes but do develop containerized applications freaked out. There were miscommunications involved here, but some people thought that this was Google killing Docker the company or Google killing Mirantis the company, because there was some confusion about who owned Docker Engine. There People thought that Docker as a tool was going away and that nobody was ever gonna have a reason to use it anymore. And it was 6 in the morning and I had not had any coffee yet. And I saw people freaking out, and they were wrong. They were freaking out about something they didn't need to freak out about. And I explained it in about 11 tweets. I went viral on tech Twitter, which was a super uncomfortable experience. Went from like 4,000 Twitter followers to like 12,000 in about 36 hours, which was also super uncomfortable, but also got dragged into SIG contributor experience for Kubernetes. They had me write a bunch of FAQs and an explanation of what was going on and the historical context of like why we were allowing Docker Engine all this time anyway, and then why we were changing in the future. And then I just kind of like didn't leave. It's like getting sucked into a bog, right? Because suddenly I could see all of this other stuff. Oh, I know how to fix that, and you're just letting it sit there. Give me that, I'll fix it. Until I landed on the release team, and then I just stayed on the release team for like 3 years until I led a release, and then they gave me the whole sub project, and now I'm truly trapped. Now I herd cats professionally for an open source project. It's fun though. It's fun. It's like there's like no end of problems for me to solve. So it's I really enjoy it.
Yes, I remember when Mirante stepped in to support Dr. Shim after all the drama. And really, this committee has seen its share of drama over years, whether it was Debian versus Canonical or Katie versus GNOME. But that's also the fun part of open source. Now, I'll talk to you, Billy. What about you? What was your very first interaction with open source? What got you hooked to it?
I sort of got into it by accident almost, but I had a Windows laptop that was so slow, it was so annoying, I just couldn't stand it. So I had a techie friend at the time, and I just said, I don't care, just wipe it and put Linux on it. I'll figure it out. So my friend did that, and I just learned to use it. And because I had to teach myself, I was a regular on Stack Overflow, and that would be my big introduction to the really massive developer community. And it just carried on more and more from there to eventually I was somebody able to help answer questions on Stack Overflow, and then started with learning Python and then into Java and just kept going from there. And at the moment, so I am not a maintainer of anything, and I probably never will be. I write a lot of code, certainly, and I love writing code, and I try to share it as much as I can. But my ADHD is just too off the rails for me to consistently stick with one thing long term. I have the same problem even listening to my favorite podcast. Oxide and Friends, I love it. The content is always juicy. I still have a really hard time sitting still through a whole episode. So I contribute everywhere I can, as much as I can. I will probably never be able to sit still long to really commit to being a full-on maintainer. But my philosophy and the last team that I worked on, the last product dev team that I worked on, the rule for the team was anything that we write for ourselves internally, anything to make our jobs easier, you have to look at it and think, can I open source this? And how will I open source this? Because not only does that mean we need to very just right from the get-go stop ourselves from coding things that just help us, but how can this help other people with the same problem? And two, also doing it that way, it just ends up being better code when you're thinking about the perspective of other people who are trying to read this and maybe use it and hopefully contribute to it later on. So I still carry that with anything and everything that I code.
Thank you for sharing that. Now I want to talk a bit about contribution. A lot of people assume that the only way to give back to open source is by writing code or putting your employee's name on your GitHub repo. But there are so many other ways. For example, you folks speak at a lot of events. Your talk may only be 20 minutes long, but the preparation and traveling can take days. That's a huge commitment. If I ask you, Kat, from your perspective, what are some of the ways people can contribute beyond code?
Yeah, so there's a ton of ways to contribute to open source that aren't writing code. I haven't written code for Kubernetes. I have written a ton of documentation. I've done a ton of functionally project management. Um, like all open source project maintainers are just engineers that have project management skills. So if you're a PM, that's a valuable skill for an open source project. If you're a technical writer, that's a valuable skill for an open source project. If you fluently speak a language other than English, that's a valuable skill for an open source project. The Kubernetes documentation is localized into a lot of different languages, and it's all done by real people. We're not using AI tooling for that, and we almost certainly never will. So if you speak a language that's not English, please come join one of our localization teams. I think the only one that's fully well staffed is Hindi, and the rest need help. So come do that. If you can read and understand a style guide, You can always review documentation for compliance with the style guide. We never have enough reviewers. We never have enough approvers. And if you sit there reviewing documentation for long enough, we will make you an approver and you'll be able to approve documentation. If you have project management skills and you don't know how to start on doing that for an open source project, come try to join the Kubernetes release team. We open up applications for that about 2 weeks before the start of every cycle. So there's, at most you'll wait 3 months until I open it up again. But all projects are in need of that kind of stuff. Most projects don't have something as formal as the release team, but certainly reviewing or translating documentation is a place everybody can start. No open source project ever is going to succeed just on the back of having really good code. That doesn't matter if people can't use your project because the documentation sucks and doesn't exist, and so people can't figure out how to use it, or if they can't find your project because it requires marketing too. Open source projects still need marketing. That's one of the resources the CNCF provides. So if you donate a project to the CNCF, they will do some of that for you. But until then, you need to care about that yourself. So I think it's always a mistake to hard focus on only ever caring about the code when there's so much more going on to ensure that your project actually succeeds. I give a lot of credit to the Kubernetes documentation for Kubernetes' success.
And now I would like to hear your opinion, Billy, as well.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to top off everything Kat just said, because I was right on the money. And yeah, it's definitely a large misconception that code is the only way to contribute. In fact, sometimes that's really isn't what people want, because you also have to consider that the people maintaining this and their responsibility to maintain it, if a whole bunch of people are contributing some code and just sort of contributing it and then moving on with their lives, the maintainers still have to maintain that long term. So there may be feature sets and other things that they have very specific reasons why they don't want to add to it, because they're already really burdened with the load that they currently have. But the other thing I would want to sort of reverse with that is there are some projects, and there's no need to name anything in particular, but some of these projects do suffer because the maintainers are also difficult people to work with. So it's also just as much kind of on the maintainers to be open to working with people and not berate people for their PRs and the issues that they're opening and stuff like that. So there's the flip side of this too that I feel like nobody's saying. So I wanted to take the opportunity to say that now.
Now, looking beyond individual contributions, let's look at organizations. Companies also play a very big role here. Now, we don't need to set a bar really high where they expect them to contribute 10% of their revenue to the project that they rely on. It will be ideal, but that's not what is happening in reality. Can you talk about what are some of the meaningful ways in which organizations can support the very project that they rely on?
Donating money is certainly helpful. Like sponsoring a project monetarily is helpful, but it's not the only thing you can do, and it's not the only thing you should do. Projects that do receive financial sponsorship usually don't receive enough money to hire an engineer. So that money gets spent on infra, or maybe like outsourcing a tech writer or something like that, or marketing costs. But even for projects that are relatively successful, like they've been successfully donated to a foundation. We can talk about the ESO drama, I guess, at this point. They still need resources that aren't money. External Secrets Operator is a CNCF sandbox project, and a little while ago, the maintainers posted a cry for help on Reddit, wherein they threatened to stop releasing ESO. because they simply don't have the people for it. And they specifically called out that they do get financial sponsorship from some companies, but it's not enough money to hire an engineer, and there aren't enough maintainers, there aren't enough approvers. They are burned out and they can't do it anymore. So they threatened to stop issuing releases for it. And that's the position that a project that's part of the CNCF gets itself into. It's much easier for a smaller project without the resources of a foundation behind it to get into a situation like that. So I would say if the product that you are selling that makes you money, that probably made you rich, is relying on an open source project, you have an obligation, not just morally, but to your own bottom line, to contribute back to it in the form of both monetary resources, just sponsor it, give them cash, and dedicating engineers to working on it. It doesn't have to be a whole team, but one, or have all of an entire engineering team dedicate a couple hours a week to it, that kind of thing. But you do have to give back, not just in money. You have to give back in actual hours of work, or that thing that you rely on to make money is going to fall over, and you're going to be caught with your pants down. It's going to be super embarrassing.
Kat, earlier you mentioned you are lucky to be paid to do this job. Isn't that a perfect example of how companies can support people to work directly in the community? Both sides benefit. The company gets value, the community gets support, and you get to do a job you love.
Yep, it's explicitly part of my job. Minimus gets clout out of it. They got a Kubernetes maintainer on staff, and they also get the benefit of I always know exactly what the community is doing, what the community wants, what the community needs, and I get to give that information back to them, and the Kubernetes project gets somebody to babysit the release team. So yeah, it's that this is exactly what more companies should be doing. It's unusual for a startup this small to be doing it, but large companies do it all the time. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, they all have entire teams that don't do anything but work on upstream projects.
So really, we have two great examples right in front of our eyes. So thank you for sharing that, Kate. Now, Billy, let's hear your thoughts on this as well.
A lot of times, large companies in particular, their lack of contribution is really the bottleneck for a lot, right? So think of this concept. If you've ever cooked a meal for 10 people and how much work goes into that, or all 10 people want to help you cook, and then it just isn't actually that much work for anyone. So even just a few of these bigger companies that are totally reliant on the time that somebody is donating, giving away for free to an open source project they use, it really just doesn't scratch much to contribute some help, figure out where help is needed, and that goes a really long way. Throw a couple more companies in, right? You have 10 people helping you cook the meal. It's just not that much work for anyone at that point, and that's something that can scale very well. The unfortunate reality is that the bottleneck there is just a lot of ridiculous policies that these companies have about what they will allow people to invest time in versus the stuff they use. Is it's very, very common that it's in an employee contract that code that you develop during work hours or on the company computer belongs to them if they want it. And that's inhibits further development that they could be contributing knowingly or unknowing to a lot of these projects. But then also, the companies, if they're successful, they've obviously figured out marketing. And I know that was brushed over a little bit already, but I just want to bring up the example of Linus Torvalds when he was talking about how if he had to do UI design on an island or to get off an island, he would just die because that's just not his talent. That's something he needs help with. You look at the original developers of the Tor project, the same thing. The documentation was all over. Everything looked scrappy. The tool was good. It's something they really needed help for. And so these are things that just aren't a big lift for a lot of up and thriving companies that totally rely on the backbone of code that other people just donated.
Do you think we are seeing positive movements here, or do companies still need a push to get more involved? We used to talk about being good open source citizen. Should we be giving companies clearer model for that? Because often they do want to contribute, but they get stuck. Maybe their code isn't ready for release. Maybe they don't have the right people, or they just don't realize that they can support in other ways than these. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we've successfully convinced the entire industry that open source software is good and that it's safe and secure. So we don't need to sell people on using open source anymore. Like that fight has like long since been won. Uh, I don't think that people have an excuse of, or companies have an excuse of not knowing that they can donate back to open source projects. Like they're just feigning ignorance if they're claiming that. That's I don't know how to express how I feel about somebody making that assertion without cussing on a podcast, but I don't buy it if a company says, "Well, I didn't know I could contribute back." Yes, you did. Come on. It's fundamentally the thing with open source is that anybody can contribute to it. Please, nobody's buying that argument. So I think we were on a good track with a bunch of companies spinning up OSPOs and really helping to like instill open source culture within their own companies and move towards doing more significant contributions back upstream. But in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of OSPOs get absolutely decimated, just like entirely laid off. And that doesn't feel good. I can't tell if it's because companies have decided that open contributing back is not profitable, or if it's just another symptom of the belt tightening we're kind of seeing across the board with everybody and their mother laying off 5,000 people a quarter, which is unpleasant and terrifying to watch. And I wish everybody would just quit it because you're all showing record profits. So what are you doing, genuinely? But I don't know. We were doing real well for a minute there, and now it does feel like things are kind of slowing down. But if that trend continues, then we're going to keep seeing more stuff like the issue with ESO. And it's just going to get more and more significant. There are a lot of consumer products that, like this one XKCD comic, rely entirely on a tiny open source project that's maintained by like 3 people. And the double-edged sword of open source is that we can also turn it off whenever we want. There's no legal requirement for us to keep releasing it. There's no legal requirement for us to issue a deprecation notice when we decide to stop updating something. We can just let it disappear and not tell anybody. And I fear that that will happen if companies don't go back towards the path of like significantly contributing back to the projects they rely on, because we're going to burn out. Even the Kubernetes project isn't immune to this one. We hurt for maintainers too. A lot of our like senior project leadership has been around for a really long time, and replacing us is hard. So we are vulnerable to that kind of failure mode too, and we're enormous compared to the rest of the open source ecosystem. So not to like scare off tech executives that are listening to this, but we do control whether or not your product operates. So continue giving back if you don't mind.
I feel like this is essential for sustainability. Are there any official user groups or initiatives within CNCF focused on this, or is this more of a grassroots discussion that needs to happen?
I mean, there's a bunch of like working groups within the CNCF. There is one for OSPOs. So that's probably a good place to hang out if you want to look at specifically OSPOs. There's also Tag Developer Experience, which has like some like slightly marketing-y stuff going on in it. SIG Contributor Experience for specifically Kubernetes is a lot about like how to make the experience of being a Kubernetes contributor more pleasant, including the onboarding process and finding out where you should go. So like certainly there's resources for figuring out where you should be doing what within the ecosystem, but each project is going to have its own contributor ladders, its own processes, its own rules and requirements, and that is where things can get a little bit more difficult to figure out. The Kubernetes project has an unusually well-defined contributor ladder and several very, very easy entry points, but we are not the norm. So if you're looking to contribute somewhere else, you may run into slightly more trouble than you would with us, but other projects need more help than we do. Like, don't hard prioritize on trying to contribute to Kubernetes. We struggle too, but like we have more resources and we have more like wiggle room to withstand lean times. Other projects do not. So consider prioritizing the weird little project with 3 maintainers that you rely on before you prioritize supporting us.
Yeah, and consider prioritizing the weird people with some very interesting talents that are part of that mix too. So the CNCF in particular has a couple people with this very kind of rare skill that's even difficult to describe sometimes. But one example is through my years of solutions engineering, I thought I was good at being able to explain the reason for open source and why you should support it and so on to the executive types or just any IT decision maker until I met a CNCF person who has all kinds of experience, and I was blown away. This is somebody that knows exactly how to speak exactly the right language to the executive types to make them not just care about contributing back to open source, but have them tactically understand all the reasons why it also greatly benefits their business. And so good. And I've never seen anyone nail it so perfectly, yet it made me feel like I'm in kindergarten on that topic. There's another person I met who really has it down well how to correctly measure developer engagement and developer love, which is something a lot of companies, the majority, I'll even boldly say, don't know how to do. And this is what we're seeing happen with this huge hit that's DevRel has been taking the past couple of years, where a lot of those teams have been getting cut because it worked great for some companies who knew what they were doing. So a bunch of other ones did it, but they were trying to measure ROI the same as they do other things, and they weren't measuring correctly what the impact was. They didn't understand what the impact looks like when it comes exactly. So having people that understand that and know how to break that down and articulate it to turn on that light bulb for these companies is just a huge, huge thing that we need a lot more of.
Now let's just change our gears and talk about one of the hottest topic right now, AI. At KubeCon, it feels like every other session is about it. My interviews here, 3 or 4 a day, every day, 90% of them are about AI. Jonathan Bryce recently said that the bridge to AI native workload has to be built on solid cloud native fundamentals. I don't want to debate for or against AI, but looking at these new workloads, what role do you see open source, CNCF, Kubernetes, and even the Linux kernel can play in enabling those workloads?
I don't think that we're doing anything more to enable AI workloads than any other like proprietary tooling. We're enabling it by virtue of Kubernetes being the default way to orchestrate something running in a bunch of containers in a distributed manner, potentially across clouds. So we're not doing anything special. We're just here, and we're what people run big complicated applications on now. So some AI workloads are getting run on it. I also don't think that this is going to last. There was a State of Kubernetes report out fairly recently. I was talking about it on another thing yesterday, and there was a bit in there about the huge growth in the number of AI workloads people reported running on Kubernetes. And the author made some assumptions based on that growth that it would soon be like the dominant use case for Kubernetes. I extremely don't agree. We're seeing an increase in AI workloads running on Kubernetes because AI is hot right now and because people like filching VCs, which I entirely respect. Please get your bag, especially from people with like a ton of money and no sense. But I think this is going to die out because a lot of these AI workloads, a lot of these like trendy AI tools are in fact just cute wrappers on 2 or 3 other AI tools that are maybe actually doing something innovative. And there's a small handful of these innovative tools and an ocean of probably mostly useless shiny wrappers that are being put on them. So I really think that this is going to mostly die quickly. This looks like the Web3 blockchain hype to me. And I think that we're going to see companies and tools that can integrate AI in a way that is intelligent and actually useful without being catastrophically expensive. And everybody else is just going to fold. And we're going to look back on this a year later and we're going to find this all really embarrassing, the way everybody like hard pivoted to AI overnight. The same way it's really embarrassing when we look back at the Web3 thing. So, yes, AI workloads are getting run on Kubernetes. No, I don't think we're doing anything special or specific to enable that. It's just in a lot of keynotes at KubeCons because that's what investors want to hear. That's it. It's a scam.
I hear the skepticism and I agree with some of it. But let me ask, is this more about how we define open source in the context of AI, or is it about AI itself being overhyped? What is the real reason behind that doubt?
I think the entire current bet of like everybody betting hard on it is wrong. I think that not nearly as many of the applications we see for it are as useful as people claim. Most of them, I think, are not useful at best, and at worst are actively a scam. There are specific challenges with respect to AI in open source because, like, what are you training it on? Is the data set open source? Does the data set not being open source have implications for the open sourceness of its output or of the model itself? What is in that black box? Like there are certainly implications there. Every open source foundation on the planet has like some kind of special interest group or working group or policy in place that's attempting to define a standard for that. And that problem is definitely not solved yet. There is a new AI working group standing up within the Kubernetes project right now that's been blowing up my inbox for the last month while it tries to form itself, because there are decisions we have to make and policies we have to write about how we interact with AI. But we ourselves as a project are not doing anything special to make it easier to run AI workloads on Kubernetes. It's a container, have fun, you know?
Yes, there is a lot of AI washing going on there. Companies just slap the name AI on their products, whether it has anything to do with AI or not, it realistically. But I'm also seeing a lot of real innovation in production where AI is transforming a lot of things. But I don't want to get into that debate. Now I want to hear from you, Billy. What are your thoughts on AI?
As you correctly clocked, there's all kinds of AI washing, and every company is trying to throw it in their product, which interesting and predictable, in my opinion, as if you look at the Stack Overflow 2025 survey, which I think is much more authentic and paints a much more holistic view of how we actually feel about the industry and where things are at and what tooling we like and what not. Way better than, paid engagements through analyst firms and stuff like that. This is really the most raw and authentic you can get. And so the people, the users, such as myself, I'll make the example of, that, adding agentic AIs to all these different cloud services and these developer frameworks around AI and this and that, that was almost the bottom of the barrel, least priority for where many of the software DevOps engineers are at today in terms of questions like, what turns you off about a technology stack, and the lack of its AI implementation was way on the bottom. So it was a similar question about, what are things that you're looking for, that you enjoy. Again, AI way at the bottom. So the thing about AI is that it's just like anything else. Let's go back to Kubernetes. We had a bubble around Kubernetes where it was just the hot thing that everyone was talking about. There were some people that understood, okay, this solves actually a very specific problem. There's a certain type of use case for this that we would greatly benefit from. It gets us through a bottleneck. There was also a lot of people just caught up in the hype, doing things that made no sense, like running a self-managed Kubernetes cluster just to host a landing page. You could have just done that with an S3 bucket and a static website, but they'll do it. They'll go, they'll jump into it. We're seeing the same thing with platform engineering. It works for some when it's implemented right and when you really understand what problem it is solving for you and understand the why it's solving that problem for you. Does that mean that there aren't a whole bunch of companies just running headfirst into it because of all the marketing, and they're spending money and they're expecting savings and they're never seeing it because they don't actually understand the problem that they're trying to solve with it? AI is no different. That's just unfortunately the way the industry works. We're going to throw a whole bunch of money at it, light a whole bunch of money on fire. It's going to solve some really specific problems for some people, and a lot, known or unknown, are going to get burned by it. So it's like this with every paradigm. AI just happens to be the focal point at the moment.
Now let's go back to Kubernetes because that's where the lot of fun is. Do you see it as a fundamental technology like the Linux kernel, or is it more of a phase where something new might come along and replace it?
No, I think Kubernetes is always going to be foundational for the CNCF. Like it is the basis for the cloud native ecosystem. All of those tools interact with and rely upon Kubernetes. I don't necessarily think that Kubernetes is broadly a foundational tool in the same way that Linux is. We may start developing applications in a different way 10 or 15 years from now, and Kubernetes will become obsolete, or we'll do what we usually do with technological growth, and we will build some kind of abstraction layer on top of Kubernetes that doesn't really replace it, but it's so abstract that you functionally don't know, care, or realize that Kubernetes is there underneath that abstraction layer, which is how basically every leap in computing has worked since the ENIAC machine, right? It's just an abstraction layer that makes you forget that you have to interact with this previously annoying, really complicated thing. So like maybe Kubernetes could become foundational in that way, like broadly across computing. But for the CNCF within that context, yes, Kubernetes is foundational and it always will be, because that stuff doesn't work without it. It's just Kubernetes has to be there.
I don't see it going away anytime soon. I would agree that it's foundational and will continue to be as long as we continue doing the cloud computing thing, because it filled in where there was a gap and providing that layer of abstraction and making it simpler to be more vendor agnostic and to be more multi-cloud. And again, for those who understand what problem it solves, these developers or companies or a combination of the two that have a use case where they can benefit from a microservices architecture and where their culture can benefit from that. And then you have Kubernetes as that orchestration engine in the middle. And with the abstractions and the ability to iterate and make development easier and all of these things that just make the entire model of cloud computing easier. As long as we're doing that, I think it's a staple in our lives.
Before we wrap, one last question, burnout. We have been doing it for so long, and burnout is something which is real, which is natural in open source or any other space. Kat, What helps you keep it exciting and stay engaged with the community like you did on day one, or you feel that you're burning out?
Oh, I am burned out. To be clear, like absolutely, without question, I'm burned out. I don't know an open source maintainer who has been consistently working on a project for this long that isn't burned out. We are all crispy. So don't let the fact that I still get stuff done distract from the fact that I am in fact burned out. Um, the answer is that every time I go to a conference that's longer than 3 days, because I go to 1 or 2 conferences a month, it's a lot. If one is longer than 3 days, I lie to both my coworkers and my friends and tell them that I am with the opposite group, and then I go take a book and I go to the nicest restaurant in town that I think I can get a table for one at, and I sit there and I eat myself a nice dinner and read a book alone. Because the peopling gets to be a little bit too much. All the noise gets to be too much. Feeling like you're having to like put on a show all the time starts to feel like it's too much, because when you're an open source maintainer and when you're a developer advocate, you don't really get to have a bad day in public. You don't get to let people see that you're having a bad day. So, although I may be burned out, it's part of my job to make sure that people can't see that. I also don't work during the month of December. So, like, my responsibilities to the release team, I'll still uh, respond to, but otherwise, I don't work in December. I also spend a lot of time outside. And by outside, I mean in the mountains without cell signal and no electronics. So that is helpful. But yeah, most open source maintainers are burned out. You just can't tell.
Well, that's true. We all go through that. And if I ask you, if you're not doing this work, what would you rather be doing right now instead?
Oh, I don't want to work. So, and I don't think most people want to work. Some people for sure do make like their jobs are part of their personality and they really, really love their job so much that it doesn't feel like work to them. I think that is not true for most people. I do not wish to be working. Ideally, I am living in a cabin, um, probably somewhere on the Olympic Peninsula or in the Cascades. The Rockies will work as well, with no neighbors and 70 acres. That's what I would like to be doing. I would like to be sitting around all day taking care of my little house with my cats and my uncomfortably large library. Like that's I would like to be left alone. I know for a person that has a very social job, that's wild, but yeah, like mostly if I had a choice, I'd left alone.
Billy, same question for you. Would you be making music, creating something else? And are you burn out yourself?
Yeah, I burn out and reignite fairly frequently. I don't have a good consistent strategy for it. What I am trying to do, because even the things I consider fun, like I just code for fun, for example, so it'll line up with stuff that I'm doing for work, but that's all very left brain. So I'm trying to get into analog techno music production using all analog hardware, as well as video production and photo, and work the right side of my brain more to get that balance. But in the meantime, I end up just having to get creative and finding ways to force a head change. So back to the ADHD note, I get locked into something and just can't let it go. So getting creative on ways to kind of force me out of that. And I also do my part to take breaks from technology and screens and go places without my phone or stop looking at it at a certain point of the day. It doesn't mean I always do that with my computer per se, but at least with the phone, that has been helpful. But yeah, it's whatever I can come up with to help with the head change. Like even right before this interview, I was actually awake the entire night and didn't even realize it because I was having too much fun coding some Pulumi stuff and Go. And all of a sudden, we're getting ready for this interview. Oops. So that's not really a good thing. But one thing that does seem to help semi-consistently. It's just music.
I fully agree with you, Billy. Kat, thank you so much. Billy, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing your insights, and being so open and candid in this conversation. I feel that we covered a lot today, from Kubernetes' role in the cloud native world to culture and people like you who keep this ecosystem thriving and growing. So thank you so much for both of you. And for those watching, if your team is building in the cloud native or finding ways to give back to open source, we'd love to hear your stories. So don't hesitate and reach out to our teams. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more conversations right here on TFiR. Thanks for watching.